So we do see companies that, whether it's from a policy perspective or anticipating tariffs, are moving away from China to other countries. In practice, the dependency on China decreased far less than the numbers would indicate.
Welcome back on the Freight Expectation podcast. Today we're going to talk about air freight. I'm here with Niall van der Wouw, most likely the most respected analyst in air freight. Probably I'm pissing off some people,
including myself.
At least one of the most respected analysts in air freight, Chief Airfreight Officer at Xeneta, and also responsible for customer success there. Welcome on the show. What a time to be alive in the air freight businesses. You've been in the air freight business for a long period of time. You know, what can we learn from other disruptive moments on where we are today?
Well, thanks for having me, Sanne. I think if there's one thing we can learn, this will pass.
Yep.
This will pass. The ups and downs, it will pass. How long it will take, I think, is to be seen. But to put it into context, I think it was the head of the Dutch National Bank. He said that the current macroeconomic environment, the uncertainty there is greater than after 9/11, than after the financial crisis 2008, than after Corona. This is truly unprecedented, and it's creating, I think, a lot of tensions between countries, but also within companies and logistics. It will pass, but it's very strenuous, I would say, for many players in the air freight value chain.
What have you seen so far on, let's say, resulting behavior from like shippers, airlines? Obviously, we see a lot of booking behavior changes from China to other places. From a macro perspective, what do you see happening right now in the air freight industry?
There is they call it a pause. I think the 90-day pause. That might be might be a truce or a pause, but there's a lot of activity going on. I would say I don't see a lot of, let's say, strategic, let's say, longer term actions taking place, because nobody knows what.
It's kind of like the result of this, right? You can't do anything long term.
So it's a lot of short term. People are either front loading is happening. To give you an example of the environment that we have customers, maybe it's an ocean example, but it's reflected, I think, also air freight. A container arriving at a port and it's valued at $50 million. Imagine you have to pay 145% duties. So we're talking about big numbers. And I would argue that transportation costs have become, in a way, far less relevant than when it comes to avoiding tariffs.
Absolutely. I have heard customers saying this literally. It's like, I don't care currently about the transportation cost as long as I have it, within the borders of the US before mid-August.
And there are numerous examples where companies did that. We saw Apple charter planes trying to get, they got phones out of India quicker into the US. Yeah. But I think very soon, then the rules changed again. So I see a lot of, I would say, short-term actions where people are trying to navigate the constantly changing tariff environment.
And that's also, do you see that? Because when we look at, let's say, specifically China to the US, we saw a massive drop-off in bookings after Liberation Day. And then a few weeks later, a massive surge when, we went into the ceasefire period. And the surge is much higher than the drop. Is this the short-term behavior that you're seeing across the whole industry?
We've seen rates drop and then recover again on that. I think I see a lot of companies doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And the interesting bit there is, are they not in a way creating a bit of it their own stress? Because if one shipper starts front loading, then there's this big fear of missing out. Then the others start doing it, and then rates go up, and then they. So it's. I sometimes, and this sounds a little bit disrespectful, but I mean it's something like a herd of sheep. You know that if a few go left, the others go left well to avoid paying unnecessary.
Well, there's obviously two perspectives on this. One, you can say it's a herd of sheep. The other one is like that macroeconomics is kind of like bullshit, right? Because every individual actor does the best at that moment for their business, and they're not thinking in macro; they're thinking in micro. What is best for my business? It's two ways to look at the same problem, but it will result in most companies doing the same things, and as a result, a little bit of a bullwhip. Yeah. Is that also what you're expecting for the remainder of this year?
I think so.
Mm-hmm. So a steep drop off in August, or is
on the air freight perspective?
Mm-hmm.
So when is it due? Is it end of July that the?
So they're different. They're different, right? So it's like July 9th is the reciprocity, right, for all countries is going to be reviewed. Then the truce with China is mid-August. Yeah, the 14th, I believe.
I think we're videoing this at June 4.
Yeah.
I mean, today he announced, or yesterday maybe, that the aluminium tariffs will double again. The issue here, I think, is that everybody is facing. These tariffs are not a result of many discussions or of a process where you have pros and cons that take a longer period of time so people can anticipate it. This seems to be an individual that can take decisions, put a signature, and they're implemented or they're revoked. So I think any timeline now is very uncertain because of this.
Yeah, and part of it is part of it will stick, right? Because there is an ultimate goal, right? Which is the external revenue service, generating revenue from product that comes into the country. Part of it is, of course, art of the deal. It's a negotiation tactic, and to get to the ultimate goal. But when you're, nobody has the crystal ball here because the only crystal ball sits in the White House right now. Right?
Much of it's crystal, but
well, I don't know, or gold. But taking this into account, that we assume there will be some of this sticking. Do you think that the current surge in bookings is basically shippers anticipating that it's not going to get better after August?
I'll be guessing a little bit now.
Yeah,
but I think that's a consensus.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think many people hope this will get better soon, but I think many people are planning for it will not.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at the last round of negotiations, especially between China and the US, in the end, China did not give in.
Yep.
It was the US who changed their policy, and as a result of that, China as well. So
it's a little bit of a saving Santa, right?
So it's and these are powers well beyond any company.
Yeah. Hey, let's talk a little bit about capacity moving around the world. With this trade war ongoing, we see a lot of additional demand from Southeast Asian markets. We hear a lot about capacity shifting to, for instance, Latin America. So what's your overall picture from, let's say, what is China losing? And I'm now not talking over, let's say, the last 3 months, but let's look at a little bit like a longer time frame. Is China really losing? Where does it go? How do you see the trade patterns shifting?
When you ask if China is losing, what does that mean? Are they losing
export volume?
Volumes.
Yeah.
Well, from an air freight perspective,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the biggest bump in export growth is, of course, e-commerce.
Yeah.
The traditional air freight market has been slow, stagnant for many years. We've seen rates go all over the place, but if you take a let's say more macro perspective on that, it's been, I don't know, 1-2%. I mean, very, very low growth general freight market.
Yep.
And that growth out of China was because of US and European consumers being very interested in getting cheap stuff. Well, we call it stuff, but they're spending the money on it, so they see value in it.
Yep.
In a very fast way.
Yep.
With the changes of regulation in the US, I think that is going to change quite dramatically. So China was, let's say, the high-tech manufacturer, but we've seen productions move to Vietnam, Malaysia, other places. So China has become, I think, the China plus one strategy that many companies set in motion.
Or plus four these days.
Plus four.
Yeah.
Is in effect affecting China. Yes.
Do you still see that those plus ones or plus fours are sourcing a lot from China? So a lot of, let's say, the parts are still coming from China, going to Vietnam. There, manufacturing or assembly has been done, and then it moves to the West. Is there more of that happening?
I have two numbers on that, which might be.
I love numbers. Yeah.
So, and allow me to have a look here. So one of my colleagues, they made an analysis in comparing 2017 to 2025. So we have quite a long perspective. And in that time frame, the trade between China and Vietnam tripled.
Yep.
Coincidentally or not, in that same time frame, the trade between Vietnam and the US more or less tripled.
Yep.
So we do see companies that, whether it's from a policy perspective or anticipating tariffs, are moving away from China to other countries. In practice, the dependency on China decreased far less than the numbers would indicate.
Yeah, because the supply chains are complex. And a lot of the supplier parks are based in China, and they will supply other manufacturing sites in Vietnam, Thailand.
Same as Mexico.
Yeah, exactly.
China-Mexico boomed, while China-US declined, and Mexico-US boomed.
Yeah.
Do the math.
Yeah. Hey, let's talk a little bit about e-commerce. And I told you I was going to push you a little bit on this one, because in late 2023, you predicted that the market of air freight would grow 1% to 2%. And then it turned out to grow 12%. So you only missed the comma.
Yeah.
So it's not too bad, because there was a massive boom in e-commerce. When we're looking right now at that e-commerce with the rollback of de minimis, is that going to be a blip on the on the long-term trend, and are we going back to that 1-2%? How do you look at that?
So let me clarify what I missed.
Yeah.
Then, because it was a different order of magnitude, and we've been very open on that. So what did we miss in our assumption for 24, late 23?
Mm-hmm.
Our assumption was with high inflation, that people would have less money or similar amount of money to spend on goods.
Yep.
Which I think held true pretty well.
Yep.
What we missed is that for air freight, it matters where they spend that money. Because if I would go into the high street and spend $100 on clothing there, 95% chance that clothing went by ocean.
Yes.
But if I would spend even less money, but that's $80 on Temu or Shein, 95% chance that the volumes would move by air.
Yep.
So it wasn't, let's say, the discretionary spend difference that caused this. It was where they're spending their money.
Yeah. Which retailers were basically benefiting from it.
Yeah. And as a result, we saw that boom. And so that was not a macroeconomic as a development. That was more like a new business model.
Yep.
Nearly in the market, because people were not spending more, to our analysis or to our assumption. So if that is now being changed, I mean, we saw a massive drop in rates and volumes when tariffs were 145%, also for the smaller low-value shipments. And is it $100, let's say, minimum for the postal? I mean, $100 on postal ship, that kills it.
It kills it, yeah.
That's clear. Yeah. So then we still have the options of, call it the non-postal services. Here's my question. It depends on the US consumer.
Yeah.
And I don't think the jury is out just yet on how they will respond to these higher rates. Is that cool T-shirt for $5? Are you willing to spend $7 on that? Or is there a tipping point?
Yeah.
What I think will create a logistical overtime nightmare is if you look at all these different shipments, and if you need to classify them according to the right method, and then start paying duties of
I know all about that.
That is with that amount of volume.
Yeah.
So
there are 3 ways to do it right now. You either do it on a Type 1, a Type 11, or you do it on a postal clearance. But it all comes down to like, do I have all the data in place? Because it's much harder than a Type 86 clearance in terms of, let's say, data requirements.
And who runs the risk if you misdeclare?
Yeah.
And so it's... it will take a lot for an industry that's been growing 20, 30%, let's say, to go down by 50.
Yeah.
But this is quite a sledgehammer that is hitting this model.
Yeah.
I think too early to call.
Yeah.
But I'd be very surprised if we saw the same growth that we saw in recent years, e-commerce, to continue into the US. I think that is...
No, but do you see it continuing somewhere else? Because there's a lot of rerouting of, let's say, charter planes, Budapest, Latin America. What do you see there on the macro?
This is e-commerce was driven by US and European consumers. I mean, I call it low value stuff, but they call it a cool T-shirt or a cool gimmick. That they were able to buy.
It's apparently it has value.
It has value.
Otherwise, people buy it.
Exactly. So it has value.
It's a good value for money. Yeah. No.
That desire is not gone.
I agree.
So, but if they cannot combine factory and consumer in this cost-efficient manner, that will affect, I think, demand because they're only willing to pay so much. The European Union announced plans. I think it was €2 per shipment. That will not kill the model.
No, it will not kill the model. No.
Let's see how they will do with all the admin and if that would affect, let's say, transportation times.
Yeah.
But I think that will continue.
Yeah, I do think that the US might actually move forward by, reducing the minimus from any country in the world, because now it's focused on China and Hong Kong, but it looks like it's going to extend to other countries as well.
Yeah, and if we look at, there are several countries in Southeast Asia protecting, let's say, their local manufacturing base and saying no e-commerce out of China for us. Yeah, or at least.
So we should assume there are more protectionist measures around the world to protect local production.
Yes. Yeah. But I do think that's whatever the US said. I think you're not protecting US producers, I would say, by stopping the de minimis from China to the US. Because
the trade flows will just change.
Yeah, but also
in terms of.
But I think the median value was around between $70 and $20. Yeah. That is not stuff you will start making in the US.
No, that's what I mean. It's just going to come in a different way on either a Type 1 clearance and then sits in a warehouse stateside, right? That's what we see. We run an omni business or a 3PL fulfillment business. The demand is through the roof there because a lot of supply chains become, they go domestic again.
Where I have my doubts on whether ocean can play a big role in e-commerce. And maybe I'm oversimplifying, but I think the success of this model was that it was cheap and it was fast.
Yeah.
And how could they keep it cheap? Was, the mass volumes, but also I think limited inventory risk.
Yep.
And even maybe manufacture to order.
Yep.
The moment you start using ocean, instead of a flight of 12 hours, it is 30 days on the water. So you need to do forecasting, you need to assume, someone needs to carry the risk. I think that will create so much cost in the model that I wonder if you can, with all the smartest intelligence that you have, if you can translate that from air.
I do think, though, that these companies, these global e-commerce companies, there's very competent people working there. I've met many of them, very smart humans. I think they will also start looking at segregating the SKUs, right? And say, what can go ocean, what needs to remain air, what is changing quickly, what is not changing quickly.
Exactly.
So I think there will be definitely a lot of evolution. Hey, let's talk a little bit about supply demand for air freight capacity, right? Boeing is not delivering a plane on the air freight side. There's quite a few old planes still flying around. Airbus just announced that they're postponing the 350 freighter even a little later. So there's not much new capacity added. The 777 has issues with being approved for freighter or to convert, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of, let's say, things going on the supply side, where the supply side growth is very limited. We also know the demand side growth is very heavily influenced on the e-commerce side. So it's very hard for, let's say, somebody who's not very deep into this, how is this going to play out, right? The supply demand, because we were definitely in a situation where there was more demand than supply, which resulted in historically high pricing for air freight. Now we're seeing low pricing, although we're now in this truce, there's a recovery. But, how do you see the demand supply play out with, knowing what happened? The supply side is pretty known what's going to happen.
I think they will balance out. If I look at the last 20, 30 years, there's never been a tremendous shortage.
Yeah.
Yes, we've seen maybe certain weeks or certain days.
Peak season,
crazy charter rates. But they come down very quickly again. Mm-hmm. So I will be surprised if the manufacturing issues that these boat vendors have would upset the market in the coming 1 to 2 years. Yes, there are old planes, but we all know that if rates go up enough,
old planes fly.
So it's I don't think there's going to be a shortage on a global level. And if there are shortages on certain lanes, the airlines are opportunistic enough and more agile, they will move away the capacity to accommodate for that. So my best guess, I think that from an air freight perspective, secondary regions will probably pay a price for that if the lack of new capacity and a sudden, let's say e-commerce survives all of this and keeps on growing at a similar kind of rate, then that will be the main market, and they would redirect capacity from, let's say, South America or Africa.
So what you're going to see in those moments of, let's say, more demand than supply is that the secondary regions are going to suffer in terms of supply.
That would be my... I think that's the most logical, because then they will fly where they can get the highest rates.
Yeah, and that's, of course, it's air freight. So it's very... you can move planes around pretty quickly if you can get it organized with the pilots, which is different than with ocean freight, where, it takes much longer to reposition a network.
And even though, if we say on a global level, demand is growing faster than supply, there'll be many, many markets where that is not the case, and a few where it likely is the case.
Yeah.
So that will balance.
Yeah. So now let's shift gears. I'm now a shipper, an importer in North America or Europe. What should I take away out of this conversation? Hold on.
And we recently had a round table at our company, and I got the question from multiple shippers. What do I do?
Of course, it's the most common question.
Yeah, and I gave him 3 pieces of advice. One is make sure you get enough sleep. Don't drink too much, and do a bit of sports, because you're going to need all the energy you have in navigating this.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot of plans. You're going to spend weeks on plans, and you're going to throw them in the bin because the landscape changed.
Yeah.
And there'll be a lot of pressure from finance on why the heck are our transportation costs through the roof. You will have understandably freight forwarders going to shippers say, hey, we have this long-term contract, but in this climate, sorry, I cannot move. I cannot. So there's going to be a lot of wheeling and dealing, things changing by the day. So I think the logistical people, keep your energy high. But I think they're now nearly seasoned veterans, because if we go back the last 10 years, and we've seen it all before, in a way. Now it's an individual in the White House causing this, but with COVID, things changed. The Red Sea, things changed. It is, but the suddenness, and I think, and the impact it has, I would say, is still unprecedented.
Yeah, but we had a lot of volatility in the last years. Flexport is only 11 years old, and shippers ask us, when do we get back to the normal? It's like, well, I haven't seen it. It started with the Hangjin bankruptcy in 2015, and ever since it's been rocky, basically. So stay healthy
Stay healthy.
and just make quick. Don't spend too much time on planning then either. Right?
Maybe another example on this. We have a customer that they during Trump won. They decided that they wanted to move their factory away from China because they were expecting over the longer term for the tension to increase and maybe have a result in trading conditions.
Yep.
And setting up a factory, with permits and everything, that takes a while. So even though it was in 2017, I think that they decided to move the factory, they launched their new factory to replace China in, I think, February 2025.
Beautiful timing
in Vietnam. And then a few weeks later or a few months later, Vietnam gets slapped with these additional tariffs.
The 46%.
You can imagine the frustration.
Yeah.
So my advice would be keep your energy up. Don't look too far ahead because things might change overnight.
Yeah.
And stay close to your vendors because you will need them.
Yeah, and that's and what we keep on telling customers is like, it's the context that changes, but you have to just get as much information as you can have, and then use that to orient yourself and decide and act very quickly. Because if you just run faster through this decision making cycle instead of just making like long plans and sit on it, just digitize your supply chain, get as much as information real time, make quick decision, you can outpace your competition. And therefore, your competitive advantage is now fast decision making.
It is.
It's not necessarily 5-year planning, right? It is.
I would argue 12-month planning. In this environment, who knows how the world will look like in 12 months from now. So stay close. And I think... and this is going to sound be a little bit kind to each other. Because I think after COVID, there was little, I call it the emotional bank account. It was pretty empty.
Depleted.
in many ways in the shipper freight forwarder relationship for understandable reasons. But if people become a little bit more kind to each other and that nobody's trying to rip off the other, but it's just a very difficult environment, things changing, and a little bit more respect in that sense, I think will help also the energy levels.
Yeah, so focus
nobody is welcoming this unprecedented environment.
It's the one team, we're all in this together, try to get to deliver the results together. Yeah, I do agree with that. So if I wrap this all up, you basically say like, we've seen this before, but it's a little bit more abrupt. It will settle down again. So will the supply-demand balance will settle down. And for the rest, get a lot of sleep and don't drink so that you have the energy to make fast decisions.
I think that's a very good summary, I would say. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, cool.
All right. Thanks, Sanne.